What's up, guys? Also Footballtalk here. We've reached the halfway point of our divisional draft breakdown series, having finished up on the NFC and the AFC North and East respectively. The approach remains the same: go through every team's draft class player by player, talk about the fit in the roster, in cohesion with the other moves that we've seen those teams make already, give a quick review of each haul, and then at the end compare them to each other inside the division. I will mention any moves that we saw beforehand in order to give some context, but for the purpose of this exercise, I'll only take trades into account that actually happened during the draft. Of course, if you want more detailed breakdowns of my top 10 overall prospects at every position, my general overview of the draft, list of impact undrafted free agents, and so much more, make sure to head over to my page footballtalk.com. Timestamps for each individual team and the divisional draft ranking are down below as well. This time we'll be talking about the NFC South, where first up with the letter A, the Atlanta Falcons, who could have approached this a few different ways actually, because this is clearly a roster in transition now that they have moved on from Matt Ryan. But the three areas that they really wanted to address most were wide receiver, edge pass rush, and at least take a fly on a quarterback. And I'd say they actually addressed all those pretty well. Here are quickly the 8 selections they made. First round, 8th overall, Drake London, wide receiver USC. Second round, 38th overall, Arnold Ebiketie, the edge defender out of Penn State. Later in the second, Troy Anderson, linebacker Montana State, 58th overall. 74th overall in the third round, Desmond Ridder, quarterback Cincinnati. Another pick later in the third round, 82nd overall, D'Angelo Malone, the edge defender out of Western Kentucky. Then the 5th round, 151st overall, Tyler Algier, running back BYU. And then in the 6th, two Georgia guys, Justin Schaefer, interior O-line, and John Fitzpatrick, the tight end. So first up with London, who was my number one wide receiver and actually went as that as well. 2021 was his first year with only playing football, since he was a 2-star athlete, playing basketball as well as USC. And that background on the court kind of shows up as well with the way that he can be quick out of his stance and kind of set up his routes, as well as sometimes he would run a delayed flat route, which it almost looked like the setup of a baseline run. The one thing that stands out right away and that everybody's talking about, that ability to win down the field in contested catch situations, is just incredible. One of the very best that I've ever seen in terms of positioning his body, boxing out guys, and winning through contact. This is why he actually led the nation with 19 contested catches last season, despite only playing 8 games, I believe. And another thing that isn't talked about with him, where people talk about this guy, just a big possession receiver, he actually had 1 more yard after contact than Arkansas's Treylon Burks, who was widely regarded in this year as the premier yards after catch threat. Has that ability to turn up the field, make the decisive cuts to make people miss who come in too hot, but also the pure strength to fight through contact and have defenders bounce off himself. He does lack that extra gear, I would say, to detach vertically or expand separation after creating an angle for himself initially. And last season as well, there were quite a few concentration drops where he would just take his eyes off the football. Not necessarily a problem with his hands at all, but did drop 8 of 96 catchable targets, so that's going to be something that he has to work on. But wide receiver was a desperate need for Atlanta here, with Calvin Ridley being suspended for a year for the whole gambling stuff, where it looked like maybe Olamide Zaccheaus or somebody was going to be the number 1 receiver, which obviously not the great situation. And now you get him in, along with Kyle Pitts, those 2 big bodies. All of a sudden that whole room looks different. And you give whoever's playing quarterback for you a chance, actually, because this was looking to be a sad group, actually. And I think they really got the number 1 for the future. Then in the second with Ebiketie, a guy that they actually moved up 5 spots with the Giants here, giving up an early 4th round in the process. Had a monster year with Penn State, his only season there, after transferring over to Temple. 18 tackles for loss last season, speaks to his ability to make plays in the backfield, whether it's chasing from the backside with great pursuits or backdooring blockers on the front side who overset him to the outside. And along with his 8 sacks on the year, he had 44 additional pressures and 32 of what Pro Football Focus calls other pass rush wins. That ability to win inside and out, stretch up the field with a great burst of the ball, and then really quick to hit his inside counters, has a pretty nasty up and under move that he was able to really give blockers problems with. When you watch the Ohio State game, for example, that ability to really threaten either way kind of pretty much stood out there. It did take him until his 50 of college to actually become a true difference maker on defense, I would say. He is rather undersized for the edge at 6'2", around 250 pounds, maybe even slightly below that. And a lot of his pass rush production came on those inside counters, where if you have guys that have that strong post leg, to mirror those and be able to stun him as he tries to shoot inside, his rush pretty much deadens, and at that point, when guys know that it's coming and he can't really win on that primary move right away. That might be a bit of an issue in the NFL, especially with the ball coming out a little bit earlier. Looking at the Falcons, the top veteran edge defender right now is Lorenzo Carter. So ABKD could be that alpha guy for them that they really need, at least on passing downs, which is a position that they've been really lacking for the last few years. And then later in the second with Troy Anderson, one of the craziest college histories that you will ever see, as the Big Sky Freshman of the Year at running back. Then the year after, he's an all-conference quarterback. And then these last 2 years, he's playing inside and outside linebacker, being the FCS Defensive Player of the Year in 2021. And he's also one of the craziest athletes out there at 6'3", 240 pounds, with 4.42 speed and just absurdly easy movement skills. That ability to change direction in space and float around, cover a lot of ground, as well as in the run game when ball carriers try to bounce it outside, that speed that he has out to the edge. He really makes some of the craziest flash plays that you will see from the linebacker spot, and was one of the most fun watches I had. Because he did play a lot of positions and roles there at Montana State, he'll have to refine himself at one spot, and there's certainly some guessing going on at this point, where he's not really able to gradually read his keys in the run game necessarily, and approach the ball that way. And at this point, more of a spot zone dropper, not really somebody who has that ability to shut down multiple routes and progress through those, kind of like the quarterback would do. The Falcons did restructure Deion Jones, but they saw Foyesade Oluokun walk out the door. They also signed Rashaan Evans to a one-year deal, and Michael Wright they have there as well, who's shown some signs as a young player. But I think this guy really has all the talent in the world, and his ceiling is pretty much uncapped. I wouldn't be shocked if he were to start early on and really turn into a star player for them. Then in the third with Ridder was my number one quarterback in terms of an immediate starter, because for me it was Liberty's Malik Willis at the top, then Matt Corral second, and Carson Strong third. But all of those guys will at least have to sit out a year, I believe, to really play at their best, with Strong being kind of a special case because of the knee injury. You don't know what's going on there exactly. But then I had Ridder slightly ahead of Kenny Pickett, who went in the first round, the only one there, and Ridder was actually the second guy to come off the board. You look at the career numbers, over 10,000 passing yards, over 2,000 rushing yards, with 115 total touchdowns versus 20 interceptions. And he ran real NFL concepts there at Cincinnati, where he would read the front side and then would come backside to the dig route, or he would let go of a post route when you had a safety sitting kind of flat-footed in quarters and stuff like that. And then he can really scoot as well, 4.52 speed, has that ability, those kind of moments of almost absurd elusiveness in terms of they're opening a lane and him being so quick to shoot through it and punish the defense. So he brings you that as well. There is certainly some inconsistent accuracy, doing too much work with his elbow and kind of locking his front foot into the turf to some degree. He's rather deliberate with his drops and has that elongated delivery, which you saw in the Alabama game, for example. They kind of put together a game plan where they were able to knock down a lot of his passes, running kind of this delayed twist where they had somebody in those passing lanes constantly. So I think he has to show a little more urgency overall and clean up his mechanics. I could easily see Ridder start more games than Marcus Mariota as a rookie, and I think he could become at least an average starter for them if he does clean up those mechanics and kind of speeds up his process a little bit. So to get him here at the top of the third is pretty good value, even though Malik Willis was my number one, and I think they are in a situation where they could allow a quarterback like that to grow, but I'm not going to hate on it here because I think it's good value. Then later in the third with Malone, which is actually the pick that they got back from Indy when they traded them Matt Ryan, a guy that can squeeze down tight ends in the run game and slip inside to create negative plays when blockers do overset him to the outside and stuff like that, while having great speed to chase from the backside. His combination of burst and bend around the corner is one of the very best in this class, with great ankle flexibility to run the arc at extreme angles, and it makes him one of the most dangerous speed rushers in his entire class, I believe. Did put together a very consistent pass rush, 126 total pressures on just over 1,000 pass rushing snaps these last 3 years, so he's been super productive in that regard. He is very small for the edge at barely 240 pounds. It kind of tends to freelance and cheat a little bit as a run defender, which could create some issues for him at the next level to stay on the field and base downs. And while we did see him convert speed to power at the Senior Bowl in particular, it's not like he has the true natural force to really ride guys backwards with the bull rush and stuff like that, so size certainly a bit of a concern here. The question is, can he be a Hassan Reddick type of player? Once again, they really needed help on the edge, and Malone at least gives them a speedball that can really stress tackles out there in the sets. So I don't hate the pick at all, and he's a fun player to watch on tape as well, but just some of the size issues. It's going to be interesting exactly the way he's going to be utilized, if he can be an every down player at the next level, or if he's just going to be a passer specialist, which so many downs are now passing down, so to speak. So in the end, his role could increase fairly quickly. Then in the fifth, you went with Tyler Algier, who without quarterback Zach Wilson there, he became the true workhorse for that BYU offense, touching the ball 304 times for 1,800 yards and 23 touchdowns. This is a 220-pound back who can really build up momentum and gives his offense some true attitude, with his 1,143 yards after contact being the second most in college football last season. And despite maybe not being the fastest guy in terms of the measurements, did have quite a few breakaway runs. You did see a 4.6 flat at the combine, which was fairly disappointing. He does have to work on changing up his footwork more effectively, and he's not an uber creative open field runner necessarily. While in pass pro, a few times you see him not fully convinced with what he's actually doing out there. So getting that area down, having conviction in this step-up angles and getting in front of guys will be huge for him as he makes a transition to the next level and wants to stay on the field on some third downs. But I think the Falcons here get that guy that they thought they had last season in Mike Davis maybe, as this between-the-tackle hammer, along with Cordell Patterson as more of this offensive weapon type. So I really like this pick for them, because they've needed the type of attitude at the running back position, which is exactly what Arthur Smith wants there. Then we get to Justin Schaefer, 6'4", 325 pounds, very quick out of his stance, and has the hip ability to cross-face defenders effectively in terms of the wide zone run game. Also very good lateral agility to mirror quick interior rushes, and the recovery skills in pass pro, even if guys get to the edges of his frame, that ability to flip and still ride them up the field. He did take a big step backwards as a pass protector this past season, going from 7 all the way to 20 total pressures on 438 pass blocking snaps. Even if he has those recovery skills, you would like to see him better with his initial steps and get in front of guys and not allow them to actually get an angle. And he is susceptible to slipping off blocks in the run game. So I didn't think there was much of a drop-off between Jamari Salyer, who a lot of people thought should have gone quite a bit earlier as well. I think he went in the 5th or the 6th round himself. I'm not totally sure anymore, but I think Schaefer, I could see him being a primary backup for both those guard spots, because he has very good physical tools and that ability to quickly improve again with some of the issues that we saw last season. And then finally with Fitzpatrick, who I watched more so on the side for the Bulldogs. They probably look at him as their number 3 tight end to use as this gritty inline blocker, because he only put together 200 total receiving yards and 1 touchdown in his 4-year career with Georgia. So even in college, primarily a blocking tight end, and he could find his way onto the roster with Kyle Pitts and Anthony Ferguson, also receiving options. So that makes some sense here if he does make it. I think this is actually one of the better classes overall in this draft, and I thought Atlanta was able to address the exact areas that they needed help at without really having to compromise on value. They get my top-ranked wide receiver, now I have 2 beasts with him and Kyle Pitts, even with Calvin Ridley being gone for the year. They added speed off the edge with a couple of guys, and athletic freedom at linebacker, who has the potential to be one of the best players from this entire draft class, potentially the early down runner, and a nice backup guard, along with having a quarterback fall to them in the 3rd round, who they could have easily taken at the top of the 2nd. So depending on if he can develop into a plus starter, this could really turn out to be a home run draft, because right now it's all about adding talent for Atlanta, and they did so at spots that they really needed to address without getting antsy. I'd say a job well done, and I'm a lot more excited to watch them this year now. Which has us moving on to the Carolina Panthers, who came in with the number 6 overall pick, and then they were set to not make a selection for another 130 picks. However, I think they found a way to address the biggest position of need, add a talented quarterback for a team that's kind of in purgatory in terms of that position, and then some talented prospects late. So 1st round 6th overall, Ike Mekwonu, offensive tackle / interior O-lineman at NC State. 3rd round 94th overall, Matt Corral, quarterback Ole Miss. 4th round 124th overall, Brandon Smith, linebacker Penn State. 2 6th rounders, Amari Barno, edge defender out of Virginia Tech, and Caden Mays, interior O-line out of Tennessee. And then finally in the 7th round, 242nd overall, Kalen Barnes, cornerback out of Baylor. First up with Ekwonu, an absolute destroyer in the run game, just exploding through contact and putting people on the ground. You look at Alabama offensive tackle Evan Neal, who's an excellent run blocker himself. When you go through the PFF data, his impact run block percentage of 17.4% of the snaps is pretty impressive, especially in the SEC. But Ekwonu just absolutely blows that out of the water at 25.9%. Really a scary sight to get in front of, whether it's drive blocks or sometimes they pulled him and get him out in front, where you saw defenders actively trying to avoid him. His footwork and overall technique, I thought, showed a lot of improvement in 2021, in particular in the pass game, where he has the big frame for people not to be able to go through him, and when guys do get an angle on him, being able to drive them off the spots and guide them off track, which is why he only surrendered 3 sacks and 10 total hurries on 500 pass blocking snaps against a few talented players in the ACC coming off the edge. He is still rather wide with his hands, and there's a bit of a wind-up with his strikes in pass pro, so there is room to grow in terms of his ability to sustain that half-man relationship and forcing edge defenders to run themselves past the quarterback, so to speak. Jermaine Johnson in particular did give him some issues, and he's had his problems dealing with up and under moves where he transitions too far of his weight to the outside. I mentioned this in my ultimate mock draft. Carolina has had a different starting left tackle every year since Jordan Gross, all the way back in 2013. Now, whether you keep a corner at left tackle, put Brady Christensen there and kick ass with a corner at guard, or kind of reconfigure the O-line next year altogether, this guy boosts your run game instantly and gives you a true impact starter on the O-line. Without a pick between 6 and 137, it was going to be tough to grab any of these quarterbacks for Carolina, but they got my number 2 guy at the position in Corral here for giving up the latter one of those picks that I just talked about, along with a 2023 third rounder, to secure themselves one of the more talented passers in this draft. Corral has the quickest feet and release in this entire class, just under 4,000 total yards and 31 touchdowns last season, and really cut down his interceptions in a major way to only 5. Dude can throw some absolute lasers, at times with his feet cockeyed, or where he almost crow hops into the throw and just drills his target over the middle. You see him also escape from pressure and keep his eyes downfield for big plays quite a bit, some of the crazier off-schedule plays in this entire class. And that ability to just shoot through a lane and quickly pick up yards, also punishing the defense at times with that. You look at the total pass attempts, 60% of those carried on RPOs and play action, so that is very tough to project to the next level, because it was just such a collegey offense, I would want to call it. Had 23 career fumbles with 8 last year, so in those situations where the pressure is caving in, he just has to do a better job of protecting the football, not trying to bleed out the play. And sometimes he really doesn't have no off button, particularly when he is able to get out of those hopeless situations and then lacks the maturity to just live for another down, which is something that he really needs to learn. You think back to the 2020 Arkansas game, where those kind of issues just amassed themselves. This is what I had in my scouting report, however. While Corral has close to zero experience with any NFL dropback concepts, and will have to learn making much more complex reads, I think with the ball placement and feel for where the leverage advantages are and the open areas to attack that is clearly there, you have to dig through his tape to find stuff that you will see at the next level, but there are several things that will translate to it. At this point, I'd just much rather take a chance on somebody who has some of the things that I believe you can't coach, and let him prove to me that he can learn how to execute NFL passing concepts, rather than get somebody who can handle those probably, but I still have major issues with other areas that I'm not sure if I can correct. So for Corral, probably would be best to sit a full year and actually learn an NFL playbook. But with Sam Darnold there, some of the issues that he's shown, just not being able to resurrect his career, it'll be interesting how early we'll see him out there and how hurtful it may be for his NFL future. Once again, my number 2 overall quarterback, so great value here. Next up with Brandon Smith, just an absurd athlete at 6'3", 250 pounds, with 4.52 speed, elite jumps, with 34.5-inch arms and 10-inch hands. Primarily played Sam linebacker for Penn State and showed that ability to squeeze down runs from the edge, as well as cover distances in a hurry as a zone defender where he would bail out and really make up ground, as well as a pass rusher, that closing burst coming off the slot at times. He is a slow processor in the run game, not being able to trigger on keys and identify schemes, very much a see-ball, get-ball type of play at this point, as well as just more of an athlete than a football player, I would say, when you look at this stage of his career. As a tackler, you see him leave his feet way too often, and that creates some issues here as well. So there is a long way to go. Shaq Thompson was a beast early on for Carolina last season, and is that rangy player on the second level. Smith, like I said, has a long way to go, but those two together on that second level at some point could just be unreal with the ground that they can cover. Probably going to be more of a specialist early on, but the talent is through the roof, and don't mind a gamble like this, even though I wasn't very high on him altogether. Then in the 6th round with Amari Barno, has that lanky build at 6'4.5", 245 pounds with 34-inch arms, has a pretty stunning first step to stress tackles quickly, and he actually set the record for edge defenders at the combine with a 4.36 in the 40. offers an intriguing toolbox for hybrid outside linebacker role, where we saw him do some spot drops, that ability in the run game to be active, and then as a pass rusher as well, obviously that speed off the edge that he has. He has shown some improvement in that area, but still doesn't make proper use of his length to really lock out his arms in the run game. There's not much of a rush plan to speak of really here, and he has way too many wasted reps. It's just way more flashes than any type of consistency at this point. The Panthers just continue to add to that edge group after losing Hassan Reddick this offseason, and get a similarly freakish athletic profile here with Barno. He has a long way to go, but I see a vision in terms of the player that you want to develop him into. And then with Cape Mays, 6'5", 320 pounds, rugged all-around player with good girth in his lower half, has played at a high level across all 5 positions on the O-line, where he started his career at Georgia and then transferred to Tennessee, operates with low pad level, and really that ability to just get it done in the pass game, being able to read the rush patterns and stay in front of guys in that regard, which led to only 1 sack and 4 more hurries and 272 pass blocking snaps last season. He does play too top heavy and leans into contact way too much, leading to powerful defensive linemen being able to pull him to the side as the ball carrier approaches. We saw that in 2020 against Fedarian Matthews of Alabama, just absolutely manhandling him, tossing him to the side. That was kind of rough to watch in terms of the tape for him. And I would say he's an average athlete without the kind of tackle feat that you want to see. But as that 7th, or depending on how many guys they carry on game day, maybe the 8th guy, Mays' versatility should keep him in the NFL as long as injuries allow him to, even though he may never start to any extended capacity. And then finally Barnes, I watched more so on the side when I was watching the 2 Baylor safeties. Obviously came in 100th of a second only off the Combine 40 record, so obviously has that long speed. His technique, however, leads to plenty of work, and he heavily relies on that speed, but there are certainly some things to work with here. And as a guy getting this late within the last 20 picks of the draft, I don't mind it. As I mentioned when I got to the Panthers, there's a lot to like about this class, particularly in the spectrum of this alternative world where they have potentially selected Kenny Pickett, the quarterback, all the way at the number 6 overall spot. They get a true impact player at a major position of need with Ekwonu, my number 2 overall quarterback, who I actually liked a lot better than Pickett, and I believe has the ability to become that guy for them if you allow him to grow steadily. And then just a bunch of freaky athletes. It was all ass kick and blazing speed for them when you look at this class, and I'd gladly give up a mid-round pick next year to take a swing at the quarterback position. We know that Matt Rule is on thin ice, and they need to show signs this year, but they have somebody not named Sam Darnold to give them a spark at the quarterback spot without having to really invest a whole lot into it. The fact that they didn't have those mid-round assets is a different story, but Scott Fitterer and Rule made some good use of the capital that they ultimately had at their hands. Which leads us to a 3rd team here in the New Orleans Saints. Somehow they were able to invest a couple of future picks in the 1st and the 2nd round without really acquiring any type of veteran player here, and they still only found a way to make 5 selections. So I'll quickly run through those. 1st round, 11th overall, Chris Olave, wide receiver, Ohio State. Then 8 picks later, 19th overall, Trevor Penning, offensive tackle on Iowa. 2nd round, 49th overall, Alontae Taylor, cornerback, Tennessee. 5th round, 161st overall, DeMarco Jackson, linebacker, Appalachian State. And then in the 6th round, 194th overall, Jordan Jackson, interior D lineman out of Air Force. And what I'm about to say has nothing to do with Olave himself, since I believe he's a rock-solid player. But credit Warren Sharp here for pointing this out. This is what they gave up in order to draft Olave, the other 1st rounder Trevor Penning, and the 6th rounder, just in terms of the pure assets used. Veteran wide receiver A.J. Brown. From this draft, wide receiver Jahan Dotson, Brian Robinson Jr. the running back, quarterback Sam Howell, tight end Cole Turner, and linebacker Kyron Johnson. Then a 2023 1st rounder and a 2024 2nd rounder. That is just insanity to me. As far as Olave as a player goes, you love how smooth he is as a route runner, the speed to detach vertically, has excellent hands and skills all around the sideline, so he's going to be one of those tool type specialists maybe very early on in his career. He does have a rather slender build and doesn't bring you much after the catch, with very little contact balance to actually bounce off hits or anything like that. You like what he brings in terms of a polished player alongside Michael Thomas, who's back there again. You get that duo of Ohio State wide receivers out there, with Olave adding that vertical component to match with Jameis Winston's big arm. But just the resources used, we'll get to this at the end. Very questionable how much they actually gave up here. But then the other guy that they selected in the 1st round, Trevor Penning, the only offensive lineman to be a finalist for the Walter Payton Award, given to the best FCS player in the country. set the school squad record at 625 pounds, a guy that just wants to be a bully out there for defenders, routinely puts bodies on the ground in the run game, where he just continues to work through the whistle and twist guys to the turf, land on top of them. That's finally when he's going to be happy. Has some good length and movement skills as a pass protector, being able to just mirror rushes, which is why he only allowed 13 total pressures and 1 actual sack last season. His nasty mindset does hide it at times, but his pad level and hand placement create real issues in both facets of the game, where in the run game, if guys are able to defeat him off the line, even if he tries to push them around, it can draw some flags as he tries to hold on to them and stuff like that, just allowing them to get that initial angle. And then rushers being able to get underneath him with the long arm, just riding him back into the quarterback. You saw that routinely at the Senior Bowl as well, where people were able to expose him in that. And the media just wanted to talk about this nasty player who was throwing people to the ground, but actually drawing a bunch of holding penalties, would have if it was an actual game situation, just being ridden backwards, exposed some of his bad technique in that regard, not keeping his chest clean and allowing guys to stab at it. And the penalties were an issue in college, a major one if I want to say so. In his last 31 games, drawing 34 total penalties. That's just unacceptable and something that he really has to work on. The Saints needed a replacement for Teron Armstead at left tackle, and pending while he does still have a ways to go, the Saints will rely heavily on the run game, so at least that's certainly his strong suit, and I think he'll fit in there, where that offensive line coaching we saw there, the way that they worked with Armstead, just being a patient pass protector and the smarts that they showed, I really think that this is the right landing spot for him. And then in the second with Taylor, who was my number 8 cornerback, so I didn't hate this unlike some other people. Has that really lanky build with 32-inch arms and the diversity of his press approaches, where he can land one-handed stabs or two-handed press, be really physical, soft press technique. Just has those 4 years of starting experience in the SEC, which also shows up in zone coverage with his positioning and falling off from his initial assignment. Has the willingness and activity to get off blocks and set the edge in the run game, so really an all-around player. But prior to this past season, only having 11 passes defensed through 32 games, the ball production certainly lacking in that regard, not as fluid in his transitions as some of the smaller corners, and as a tackler tends to get over his skis and leave his feet way too much, which leads to misses in that regard. Paulson Adebo had a nice rookie season for the Saints last year, along with Marshall Lattimore and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in the slot. So Taylor will probably be a primary backup, but I don't mind that investment into a shallow group of corners. And you get somebody who has that all-around skill set, so maybe as the loose Marcus Williams, as the free safety, and that ability to play a lot of single high coverages. Maybe we see more zone and just diversity in terms of the coverage approach. So Taylor as a guy who has that all-around skill sets, I can see make a lot of sense here. Then we get to the 2 Jacksons, first up with the linebacker from App State, who was the 2021 Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year with 20 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, and pass breakups each. Is disciplined with keeping his shoulders square to the line of scrimmage against the run game, particularly working against zone concepts, and then he can rip through the blocker's reach to create an angle on the ball carrier. Shows good awareness for targets and space as a zone defender, and he can kind of hit another gear when he has an open lane as a blitzer to close in on the quarterback and go through the running back if he's in the way. And you see some fast tight ends and backs being able to create some separation on Jackson down the seams, so maybe not somebody who you want to get matched up one-on-one with guys working down the field. By drafting Pete Werner last year to put alongside Demario Davis, once again I don't see a path for playing time outside of injury here for Jackson necessarily, but another pick to ensure themselves versus injury, and he was my number 13 overall linebacker, so I don't mind this pick at all here. And then finally Jordan Jackson, I didn't get to watch much of, 6'4", 295 pounds with some serious juice as a penetration style player in the B-gap, running a 4.95 at the Air Force Pro Day, and there are certainly flashes of him creating disruption and being a type of impact player, but at this point he doesn't really know what he's doing yet, just shooting blindly upfield and not really having a plan after that, as well as a pass rusher to be able to set up his moves. But I like this for them as a developmental player, since they've lost some bodies on the interior D-line and need to keep reinvesting into it. I would certainly disagree with the process for New Orleans at the top here, considering all the resources that they spent on getting my number 26 and 32 overall prospects, if you just look at it that way. I get that some people had those guys significantly higher, but it's still about the total value of the draft picks that they've invested into them, and I don't really see those two things matching up. The Saints clearly believe that they can be a player in the NFC, which you can't really blame them for considering all the talent that has switched conferences. But I think they overpaid here, and you can argue if they should have taken a gamble on a quarterback with Jameis Winston and Dalton, then spending a 4th rounder last year on Ian Book, who to me is a career backup, and Taysom Hill is still floating around somewhere as well. General manager Mickey Loomis finds a way to manipulate the cap every year, and this has been one of the most competitive rosters ever since Drew Brees got there more than 15 years ago. But I thought they were set up for a bit of a reloading process here at least, and if they are able to make some noise in an underwhelming NFC field, they won't really care. And from that perspective, this class addressed two of the biggest areas of need, with instant starters probably, and they added some quality depth at other positions that they needed. Just in terms of the value at the top, like I talked about, didn't love that. But that is us moving on to the final team for today, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who originally owned pick 27 and had reportedly told Georgia safety Lewis Cine that they would select him if he was still on the board when they were picking, as he kind of told us himself on some kind of interview that he was doing. But they moved back 6 spots in exchange for picks 106 and 180. And with the 33rd pick, they selected Logan Hall, the interior D lineman out of Houston. Then later in the second, 57th overall, Luke Goedeke, the offensive tackle, interior offensive lineman out of Central Michigan. 3rd round, 91st overall, Rashad White, running back Arizona State. 2 4th rounders, Cade Otton, tight end Washington, and Jake Camarda, punter Georgia. In the 5th round, 157th overall, Zion McCollum, cornerback Sam Houston State. Then in the 6th, 218th overall, Ko Kieft, the tight end out of Minnesota. And then finally in the 7th, 248th overall, Andre Anthony, the linebacker out of LSU. At the top of the second here with Hall, a very lean 280 pounds with just over an 80-inch wingspan. Looks kind of like an undersized 3 or 4-eye technique, that long build. Has a lot of force in his hands and agility to work around blocks in the run game to create negative plays. And then as a pass rusher, he's very light on his feet. His best moves at this point, the club swim and the push ball variation, which with his length work out really well. And it gets pretty tough for blockers because if they do overset, he has that ability to counter, work across their face, and that is something that he can still perfect, really give blockers some issues. But then if they don't commit properly, then he will win on that first move just with the length and the explosiveness that he brings to the table. He does have an extremely high cut build, which leads to some pad level disadvantages, and you see it in the run game, and just a bit of a tweener build-wise. As a pass rusher, he can still improve his diversity of moves, and relies too heavily on the spin move late, which at that point really doesn't accomplish much anymore. I think this guy's a replacement for Ndamukong Suh and William Golston to some degree, as that second guy on the inside, who they can move around in passing downs and complement Big Vita Vea. So certainly made some sense with those losses that they had to invest into that group. Then Luke Goedeke, a guy who began his career at a small school as a tight end, tore his ACL in 2020, but was still able to log 25 career starts at right tackle for Central Michigan. Has a quick jump off the snap in the run game and really rolls his hips through defenders, creating a lot of power in his quads to drive defenders off the spot in the run game. In pass protection, features a strong anchor and excellent punch timing to widen the arc of rushers and force them to work way around him or go through him, where he has that base to be able to sit there and take stab at his chest and stuff like that. He is a below average athlete for the tackle spot, however, I would say, and only has 32.25-inch arms. Tends to overslide in the run game at times, and advanced defenders will be able, with the long arms, to stab at his chest and give him some issues just because he can't quite get there. With the retirement of Elmer Pett, I guess Goedeke does slide inside and start right away at left guard as an upgrade over Aaron Stinney, which mitigates some of the issues that he has in terms of length and athleticism to some degree. So as I think about it more and more, I think this is actually the better fit for him. And then in the third with Rashad White, brings a very intriguing skill set as the 6'1", 210-pound back with tremendous start-stop quickness, that ability to head off foot fake defenders in one-on-one tackling situations, shows natural hands as a receiver and instantly turns upfield to get positive yards, with that ability then to kind of create issues for the pursuit as defenders are trying to corral him because of that ability to stop and weave around traffic. But I don't believe he runs up to his size, and is more so about slicing through an opening instead of setting up his lanes conceptually and putting his blocks in great position. And there's work to be done in terms of his aiming points in pass pro, that ability to step up with the right angles and really control rushes. Even though he is a talented back, he was my 18th ranked running back, and I think he went as the 5th guy off the board there. So with Rojo gone, he can give Leonard Fournette some competition and maybe learn from him to accelerate into contact more so, which you saw with Lenny a couple of years there finally in Jacksonville, and then early on with the Bucs, had that issue as well where he wasn't quite running up to his physical self. And I think White can learn something from him, certainly, while giving them more of a passing down option. Next up with K. Dalton, a versatile blocker who is a plus in line with a multitude of duties in the run game, whether it's creating movement at the point of attack, working across the formation, sift blocks, and kicking out the end. Can really do a lot of things for you. You can trust him to find the open spots in zone coverage, and he has very reliable hands, only having dropped 6 of 97 career catchable targets. His arms come in short of the 33-inch mark, however, which does create some issues versus longer NFL defensive ends in the run game where they're able to lock out against him and create some issues that way. He simply won't stress defenses vertically, with only 23 career catches on passes 10 plus yards down the field, and he only averaged 4.3 yards after the catch, so not really a dynamic player with the ball in his hands either. But all around in terms of the blocking and the reliable hands, he does bring stuff to the table that you really like. With O.J. Howard now gone and the status of Gronk still being unclear, the Bucs needed to invest into this tight end room, and I believe at least Auden is a high quality number 2 who fits what they want to do there. Dan Camarda, the punter, was the one guy at the position that I didn't expect to hear his name called, and especially not ahead of the guy they actually call punt god himself in San Diego State's Matt Riza, because this guy was outside the top 10 in yards per punt, net yards per, punts inside the 20, and some other categories. So to get him here in the mid-4th, which was certainly all in my opinion. The Ravens picked Jordan Stout a couple of picks earlier, but he was, along with Riza, for that title as the number 1 punter, very good in terms of directional punts and pinning teams inside the opposing 20. I'm not an expert punt scout or anything like that, but Camarda, as far as I'm aware, not very high on most people's boards, and just here in mid-4th, that is certainly early for him, I believe. Then in the 5th with McCollum, an absurd athlete at 6'2", 200 pounds, 4'3" in the 40, 39.5-inch vert, an 11-foot broad jump, 6'8" in the free cone, and a 3.94 in the 20-yard shuttle, which those two numbers in agility drills were the best at the whole combine event. Has some impressive high-point pass breakups, 54 overall in his career, along with 13 interceptions in 56 total games, so some great ball production, willing in the run game to get off his landmarks and make plays, and just in terms of the all-around skill set, in off coverage to be able to drive on the ball, but also in man to stick with guys, the athleticism to counter any type of route. And he can bother receivers at the line, but he does look contact routinely and has to heavily rely on his physical gifts to get back into phase at this point. It's all just very reactionary with him, and as a tackler, often just launches a shoulder at the ball carrier, which led to 8 missed tackles last season. Still, to get him here in the 5th, when I thought he was a day 2 lock with those athletic testing numbers, which I have no idea if there's anything going on in terms of injuries or anything like that, but haven't heard anything. So he's really exactly what the Bucs are looking for in terms of corners, and they can afford him time to work on his technique, having Carlton Davis, Sean Murphy-Bunting, and Jamel Dean still there. That's a pretty good dart here in the 5th, I definitely like that. And then Kieft, along with Anthony, those two guys I didn't study. Kieft probably another insurance for the tight end spot to just add some depth with the primary blocker. And then Anthony, probably mostly a special teams asset with a pretty impressive physical profile that he brings along. So unfortunately not able to end on a high note here with a couple of guys I didn't study. And this was very much a Jason-like kind of draft. And I don't hate what they did here, but I also thought there were opportunities to do a lot better. Hall at the top of the 2nd is okay with me, even though I would have preferred going with Louis Cine at 27, like they told the guy himself that they would, which obviously isn't a big issue, I'm sure that happens all the time. But then they also didn't address that position at all later on. Godicke was one of my guys, but I was thinking more late day 2, maybe even very early on day 3. White, I'm personally just a lot lower on, but also in the context of how deep this running back class was, and some of the other guys that were on the board at that point anyway, such as Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M, who I had 15 spots higher in my positional rankings, not overall, just in terms of the running back spot. Then they invested into the time position with some uncertainty there, so I get that. But then a punter in the 4th, who wasn't even in the top 3 for most people. And I like the gamble on McCollum, but he still has a ways to go. So really there's 2 guys from this whole draft you want starting in year 1, even though it might finally be the last one with Brady in the center, so I didn't love that. But that now brings us to a divisional draft rankings, where at the top I went with the Atlanta Falcons, who I thought did a great job of addressing true areas of need, while also getting good value. A true number 1 outside wide receiver in Drake London, which they desperately needed. Then ABKD I was a little bit lower on, but if you flip him with Ritter in the third, where I thought Ritter could easily be the pick there at the top of the second, I would have had no problems with, then actually all of a sudden you have great value there. They get that speed off the edge that they desperately needed, a freak athlete at the linebacker spot. Really all around I thought they had one of the best drafts, and if Ritter does work out and he becomes a plus star, like I said, this even boosts this draft more so. Then next up we got the Carolina Panthers, I put at number 2, which were set up to actually get buried from here. If they had taken Kenny Pickett 6th overall, like a lot of people rumored them to, stay to the boards, get a true difference maker on the offensive line in Ikem Ekwonu, still get what is my number 2 quarterback actually, and a lot higher than Pickett, get him in the 3rd round, spend the 3rd round on next year, that's they use here to move up, and I don't have a problem with that at all. Just a lot of speed and physicality added to that room, and that potential to get the franchise quarterback, even though he does need a year probably to sit, and it's going to be interesting exactly how they handle that. Then the New Orleans Saints, and this is not taking into account what they did before the draft, because those were kind of the guidelines I pointed out at the start, because if they did that, they would probably be at number 4. And even on draft day, they did what they could to get the wide receiver that they targeted in Chris Olave, where at that point there was a bit of a run on wide receivers, so that makes some sense, but still just in terms of pure value, and I don't love Trevor Penning. Certainly some issues technically that he has to iron out. The stuff they did after that, I don't mind as much, but once again, making 5 picks when you give up all that kind of draft capital, and then I'm not even 100% in love with the guys that they got. So that is questionable to me. And then finally the Bucs. I just hated the Rashad White pick, to be honest, here in the 3rd. Was a lot earlier than I think he should have come off the board. And then Panther in the 4th as well. Very similar story here. Really the only value pick that they truly made was in the 5th with Zion McCollum. Other than that, I get addressing areas of need. Even players that I like, just getting them a little bit earlier than they should have gone. And then a couple of guys a lot earlier than I personally would have taken them. So once again, if the Saints, if you take everything into account that happened before the draft as well, how they acquired all those picks, maybe they are at number 4, but for now I'm going to go with the Bucs just in terms of the pure value of the players in comparison to where they took them. But we got another one in the books. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and feel free to share with some people who you believe would be interested in these kinds of detailed breakdowns. Up next, of course, is the AFC South, following the way that we jump back and forth between conferences. As always, you can find the link to my page, hellotofootballtalk.com, in the video description if you're interested in all my in-depth positional draft breakdowns and other stuff, as well as my social media handles, which are on the screen right now as well. We've got 3 more divisions to go, and I'd love for you to follow along. So until then, see you later. Peace!